Hopefully everyone can see the screen there that says planes of development.
Yes, it is clear on our end.
Perfect. I am so honored to be here with you all once again for you to join me for this session where we're going to explore the planes of development. Before we get started, I'd like to take a few moments just to share a few details that define me as your host and the creator of this presentation. My name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with nearly 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori education. Currently, I work as an educational consultant, an instructional guide for adult learners who are training to receive their Montessori certification through the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. I'm also a blog writer and a content creator for a few organizations, such as the American Montessori Society, Guide and Grow, and Nero's Toys. I hold certifications from AMS, the American Montessori Society, for the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age groups, a master's in education with a concentration in Montessori studies, and an education specialist degree in school psychology. I'm also a nationally certified school psychologist. So like I said, today we're going to dive into the concept of the planes of development. So let's go ahead and get started. During our time together, we're going to cover a range of topics, starting with, and I apologize, my goodness, this slide did not update. I'm so sorry. But we're going to start by talking about what planes of development are. And I will get this slide updated before I send it out to you all. I know that's something that the university does, so you have a copy. So I will update that. Again, I'm so sorry it did not update on this version. But we'll start by covering what planes of development are, and then we'll really take a deep dive into what Dr. Montessori described about the planes of development, what she outlined those to look like with the ages, the different characteristics of each, as well as an inspirational quote from her about the work that the child is doing or the adolescent during those time frames. I would like to invite you all, if at any point during the presentation you have a question or a thought, please feel free to raise your hand or to add it into the chat so that this is an interactive presentation. So first, I'd like to start by asking what you all think is meant by this term, the planes of development. What do you know about the stages of human development? Any ideas about what those different age brackets might look like, or these defining characteristics that might happen in a certain period of development, such as infancy, early childhood, adolescence, anything throughout the spectrum that's kind of stands out to you as a hallmark characteristic of that period, or again, even what those age brackets might be. Anything just to kind of get us started on what your foundational knowledge is about this concept. And again, feel free to raise your hand or to just pop your thoughts in the chat. Yes, is it Ronay?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yes, so my name is Roan.
Roan, okay.
Yes, so when I think of the stages of development, the first theories that comes to mind is Jean Piaget. He spoke about the sensory motor, operational, pre-operational, and the formal operational stages. Yes, so this is what comes to mind: stages of development, what a child can do at each stage, the milestones, perhaps the challenges, and even what we as adults and teachers or caregivers can do to facilitate the stages of development, to facilitate the growth of the child. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Interestingly, Dr. Maria Montessori and Jean Piaget did collaborate a bit together, and she borrowed some ideas. If you were able to join us for last week's presentation, we talked about sensitive periods, and a lot of Dr. Maria Montessori's work in sensitive periods, she borrowed from other physicians and psychologists and educators of her time, and one of those was Jean Piaget. So absolutely, you might see some overlap in Dr. Montessori's theory of the planes of development and Jean Piaget's. Any other thoughts before we get started? Anything that comes to mind when you think about the stages of human development? All right, we're going to go ahead and jump in. Oh, Roan, did you want to add something?
Yes, I did. Yes, before you move on, as a special ed teacher, it would be remiss of me not to mention that although Jean Piaget may have stipulated that there are certain things that should happen at specific stages in the child's life, children who have learning disabilities or children who have challenges, physical disabilities on a whole, may not be able to achieve milestones at the same rate as a child who we think is normal, or as a child who may have, or as a child who is expected or who has achieved certain milestones at those stages. So, of course, my heart is very dear to children with disabilities as a special ed teacher. And yes, I had to make that known. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As someone who has a background in school psychology and has worked quite a bit with neurodivergent students, if I was able to, without feeling like I might disrupt the presentation, I would have found the little reaction button and done the celebration, because that is something very near and dear to my heart as well. And you are absolutely right. It is something important to consider as we go through Dr. Montessori's planes of development, that there may be things for children who are neurodivergent, maybe who have some other disabilities, physical disabilities, that they may not meet all of these milestones at the exact same time. And it's a great way to kind of just briefly mention one of Dr. Montessori's core beliefs was the idea of following the child. So the idea that the child would instinctively know what their minds and bodies needed at any given time to continue learning and growing. And our role as the adult is to observe and see what's happening and then provide the support that's necessary for the child to continue encouraging that growth and development. So absolutely, that is such an important point for us to observe, keep these planes of development in mind, but observe individual children and see where they are on their path of development, and then provide the support that they need as they continue moving through these planes. Thank you so much, Roan. Okay, so as we talked a little bit about, human development is not this constant, steady continuum, like Roan was saying, and Jean Piaget's stages of development, and also the idea that children kind of might follow this pattern at their own pace, depending on different neurodivergencies or disabilities that they might have. Dr. Montessori also said that this phase of human development, this cycle, if you will, kind of speeds and slows, ebbs and flows. It has periods of rapid change. It has peaks and valleys. And according to Dr. Montessori, this is because humans' development through these distinct phases or planes that she called them. She called it humans' pattern of growth and change, the constructive rhythm of life, pointing out this cyclical nature that it has and really calling our attention to the transformational points, that this transition that happens between the planes. Foundational to Dr. Montessori's philosophy and her pedagogy is her observation of these planes of development. They provide a lot of great insight into the developmental milestones of any child. And they also are the bases for her multi-age classrooms that she suggested and implemented in her educational system as well. The holistic framework of development that she devised is comprised of these 4 planes. The first is infancy and early childhood, which takes place from birth to the age of 6. The second is known as early childhood or childhood, and goes from ages 6 to 12, because it has a little bit of that intro when the children are switching from early childhood into those elementary aged years. And then the third is adolescence, which takes place between ages 12 to 18. And the fourth, which she called maturity, is ages 18 to 24. She did talk a little bit about planes that she called 5 and 6. There's been some work from Montessorians since her time, what these planes look like, but these were the core 4 planes of development that she really discussed in detail. So these are the 4 we're going to dive into today. What she mentioned, she asserted that each of these planes starts with this intense period of construction of the human being. followed by this period of consolation, preparing for that next stage of development. So for this reason, you can see that the planes of development are depicted as these triangles along a continuum. They rise and they fade with these cyclical natures, and they mirror each other. So the period of adolescence, the reason those are both black triangles is because it has a lot of overlap, a lot of commonalities with the period of infancy and early childhood, while the period of childhood strongly resembles the period of maturity. Maria Montessori observed lots of different characteristics and milestones in each of these planes of development. Sensitive periods, which we talked about last week, if you were able to join us, are characteristic in each plane. So these are the golden opportunities when, if permitted, children will have these heightened abilities to obtain knowledge and master different skills. And during these sensitive periods, children learn more naturally than at any other time in their life. So we're going to talk about some of these characteristics that take place during each of these planes that really define what is happening, what's the critical things the child is mastering and learning during each of these times in their life. And during each of these as well, there are associated human tendencies and characteristics that inform how we can best prepare the environment for optimal learning for the child as well. And if you're able to, I don't know the date right off the top of my head, but in the coming weeks, there will also be a presentation that I'm doing on Dr. Montessori's idea of the human tendencies, what guides all of us, the things that we are all seeking as human beings. So I wanted to kind of start out with a quote from Dr. Montessori herself about these distinct periods before we dive in and look at each of them in detail. So Dr. Montessori stated, "I have found that in his development, the child passes through certain phases, each of which has its own particular needs. The characteristics of each are so different that the passages from one phase to another have been described by certain psychologists as rebirths." So she really emphasized that each of these periods were so distinctive and the changes between them were so profound that it was almost like the human being was being born again. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as we go through and think about how different the differences that you see between each of these planes of development. Before I shift to the next slide, we're going to jump into the first plane. Again, remember that's ages birth to 6. What are some things that come to mind for you? Some defining characteristics, maybe some of these sensitive periods, the skills and knowledge that children are mastering and obtaining. What are some of the things you think might be happening during that first plane, that first period of a child's life? And again, feel free to pop that in the chat or raise your hand. Obviously, I have a little bit of background here, but something that comes to mind very clearly for me is thinking about the growth motor, those, learning how to crawl, to walk, grasping an object, crossing the midline, all of those things, like the amount of growth that takes place during those first 6 years of life and what a child masters in gross motor abilities is just incredible. So that's something that comes to mind for me. Keep thinking, and if something comes to mind for you that's a distinctive feature, please feel free to raise your hand or enter into the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Roan.
Yes, Miss. So for me, what comes to mind is the child is learning to understand the immediate environment. So for me, I have a 2-year-old child, and when I look back during her earlier years, I remember her staring at me in the eyes. It was as if, she was asking the question, who are you? Looking at her sibling, her father. Even at home, when we go out, she would just be looking and staring. So I think it's a stage where the child is trying to familiarize themselves with the immediate environment and with whoever is around them.
Absolutely, yeah. We're gonna come back to that in just a minute. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's something that Dr. Montessori called the absorbent mind. So we'll come back to that in just a second. Thank you, Roan. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with looking deeply at these 4 planes of development Dr. Montessori described. So the first plane of development is characterized by a striving for that physical and biological independence. The child is literally trying to construct themselves as an individual human being. During these first 6 years of life, children effortlessly absorb what their senses experience. They're soaking in everything from their environment like a sponge would, which is why Dr. Montessori referred to this period as the absorbent mind. Through the age of 3, this absorption is unconscious. The child just does it naturally. They soak in everything around them. And then from 3 to 6, this process becomes more conscious. A question that perfectly captures what's happening, the essence of this period, is what is that? Children really are trying to learn what everything is in the world around them, just like Roan was mentioning. Who are you? What is that? What does that do? What happens when I do this? Common sensitivities, those sensitive periods we talked about that take place during this period are language, movement, order, refinement of the senses, small objects and tiny details, and social skills. So the child's going to be learning how to talk, how to understand when others talk, that gross motor and fine motor development we talked a little bit about. They have this desire for order. They want to take everything in through their senses, that sensory refinement. They really like small objects or tiny details like that speck of dust. And then also social skills, learning how to relate to others. For each plane of development, I'm going to share a quote from Dr. Montessori, like I said earlier, that really captures the essence of that period. So Dr. Montessori describes the first plane in her book, The Absorbent Mind, stating, "There is in the child a special kind of sensitivity, which leads him to absorb everything about him. And it is this work of observing and absorbing that alone enables him to adapt himself to it. He does it in virtue of an unconscious power that exists in childhood. The first period of the child's life is one of adaptation." And I really feel like that's what Roan was saying, right? They're really just trying to learn more about the world in which they live and learn how they can adapt to it and how they fit in. So some common characteristics that take place in this first plane are physical and spiritual construction. Who am I? How do I get along with others? How can I move my body in space? A need to feel loved and protected, adaptation to one's surrounding environment, development of the ability to formally communicate with others, development of coordinated movement. So first we start with just being able to move, and then the child moves into coordinating those movements for a purpose. Like the child shown here, we go from just walking or crawling to climbing, to hopping, to jumping, walking upstairs, a movement for a purpose, right? Spontaneous physical movement that would precede that coordinated movement, right? Use of sensory organs to observe and absorb all of that sensory input in the environment, working alone and then in parallel with others, and the need for purposeful work, which isn't something we often think about for a child's first 6 years of life, but it is something that Dr. Montessori really emphasized as being so important and so key, is giving the child things that are really meaningful for them to do. I know that it's often seen as chores, right? But in the Montessori classroom, children are often seen sweeping, washing tables, washing dishes, polishing things. And this is because the child really thrives and loves that work. It gives them something purposeful to do. So considering what that meaningful, purposeful work might look like for a very young child is so vital. So the second plane of development is known as the time of the conscious imagination. It's characterized by this craving for mental or intellectual independence. During this period, children start to begin to develop the ability to reason and use abstract thinking. They start to search for a sense of mental order in addition to the physical order they were already developing. And they begin to take charge of their learning based on their different interests and desires. A question that really highlights what's happening in this period is, why or how is it? So they know what's happening, but now they want to know the reason. What underlies the reasoning for why things work or how they work? Some common sensitivities, those sensitive periods taking place during this plane of development, are abstraction and imagination, morality and justice, culture, and peer interactions. This plane is so critical for children learning how to engage with one another, how to get along with others, how to resolve conflicts. It really is such a neat time. And going back to kind of what Roan was saying earlier, thinking about Jean Piaget, even Kohlberg and their theories of development, looking at the stages of moral development. This is something that's really important to a child between the ages of 6 to 12, is what morality and justice is and why that is. What is the reasoning behind the rules that we have in our classrooms, in our homes, and in our society? So again, a quote from Dr. Montessori that really describes the core essence of the second plane of development from her book, To Educate the Human Potential, is, since it has been seen to be necessary to give so much to the child, let us give him a vision of the whole universe. The universe is an imposing reality and an answer to all questions. We shall walk together on this path of life, for all things are a part of the universe and are connected with each other to form one whole unity. Dr. Montessori described what she called the cosmic curriculum. And this was what you can think of, it incorporates science and astronomy. It includes biology, zoology, and all of these studies she grouped together to really help the child get this big picture of what's going on in the world and how they fit in with that, how things relate to one another outside of themselves as well. If you look into Montessori pedagogy, you'll see something called the 5 great lessons. And so one of the very first lessons that we start off every school year with in the elementary classroom is called the first great lesson. And it really shows how the universe came to be. We talk about, in a very experiential way that captivates the child's imagination and encourages them to think and explore more how life came to be on Earth. A little bit of the Big Bang, we represent that by popping a balloon and all of this glitter exploding in the classroom. So that's something that really kind of gets the child's wheels turning in their mind, if you will, to think about these things, to think about the universe and how things are connected. So some common characteristics of the second plane are the disappearance of those physical features in infancy. So the child now doesn't have that baby face that we all talk about, those little, chunky cheeks that babies often have. It's also a preparation in moving from concrete to abstract learning. Children can move from needing this didactic material to being able to do things just in their mind. They really have an interest in the use of the imagination. This is somewhat of a controversial topic. A lot of people introduce ideas of imagination to children much younger, right? Back in that first plane of development. And what Dr. Montessori said was that children are so amazed and in awe of the world around them up until the age of 6 that there's no need to introduce imagination. As long as the child isn't leading that. If the child starts engaging in pretend play, then we can follow their lead. But what she said is if we stepped back and we didn't introduce those things, that the only kind of pretend play or imagination we would see from a child would be things that they were mimicking from their environment. Things like cooking dinner, taking care of a baby, pretending to be the mailman or a firefighter, right? Things that they see because they're so fascinated by what's happening in their daily life. And actually, she found that children before the age of 6 are unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. And so she really felt like this time, right, the ages of 6 to 12, was the time to introduce fantasy and imagination, because now the child can separate the concrete from the abstract. They can separate the real world from fantasy and imagination, and they're really, really engaged and intrigued by these stories. This is the time that storytelling is really, really incredible to use in the classroom and in your time and experience with children to captivate their interest. There's also this need for internal rather than external order. So that child that loved to clean up until the age of 6, now you might be finding yourself as a parent or an educator thinking, where did that child go? Now there are papers everywhere and their shoes are thrown on the floor and they're not cleaning up after themselves. And that's because they're really focused more on internal order, right? And what's happening within their brains rather than what's happening in the world outside of their bodies. There's also this desire for adventure. They want new experiences. There's a fascination with this sense of justice, like we talked about. There's this social need and this herd instinct. They want to be with a lot of their peers. They have a need for very big work. So where the very young child up until the age of 6 wants purposeful and meaningful tasks to do, the child in the ages of 6 to 12 want big projects. I once had a child, we have a work in the Montessori classroom called the Timeline of Life that shows many, many species from the very first species that science shows existed on Earth until present day. And it shows their ebb and flow, when the species began and when they went extinct. And I once had a child take a butcher block of paper and roll it out and make his own timeline of life. And he drew every animal and he colored it. It was just a beautiful piece of art. And I'm talking, something that expanded maybe 25 feet in the classroom. He would roll this paper out every day and work on another section. So that's that kind of big work that children this age are really looking for. And this is the time, maybe because of that big work they're interested in and the imagination, the ability to think abstractly, that there's the greatest potential for intellectual development as well. So the third plane of development then takes place between the ages of 12 to 18. And the third plane is coined the time of new identity. It's characterized by this effort to really construct a social personality beyond that took place in childhood. During this time, children and adolescents are striving for social and economic independence and this sense of autonomy. So thinking back to how we said there's this overlap, and we said that this third plane had a lot in common with the first plane of development. If you remember, we were talking about physical independence, right? Where the child is learning how to physically be their own person. Now the child is learning how to be their own person in social situations and in economic situations. And you'll see what that means in just a minute. It kind of happens closer to the end of this third plane. And in both times, the ages of 0 to 6 and the ages of 12 to 18, there's this need for autonomy. Children are really trying, and adolescents are really trying to express their own desires, their own wishes, their own needs. So think about a child who's 14 or 15 and how autonomous they want to be, back to that 2, 3, 4-year-old who wants to do everything for themselves, right? Same idea, just looking to exert their independence and express themselves in different ways, but still searching for that same independence and autonomy. The question that really captures the essence of this period is, who am I? Some common sensitivities, the sensitive periods that take place, still this desire to learn about social justice. There's this interest in heroes and role models as the child tries to figure out who they want to be and who they might model themselves after. There's this idea about personal dignity and also a really big need for belonging. They want to feel like they belong with their peers, is typically that belonging they're looking for. Yeah, go ahead, Roan.
Yes, Miss. So this stage, this plane, it really resonates with me because I am a mother to a 17-year-old son.
Mm.
And what comes to mind when I think of this plane is the period of storm and stress, as Hall puts it.
Mm.
And I can actually see my son, my teenage son, not having total control of himself. And he has become very sensitive to everything around him.
Mm.
So the information presented here, it really reminds me of my son and it resonated with me. So I had to raise my hand to make a contribution.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm glad it's resonating and meaningful to you. And I'm so glad you used the word sensitive, right? Because again, if we're thinking about that overlap, as a child in this plane is trying to figure out who they are, you can imagine that would make you a little more sensitive, right? There's this uncertainty about who I am and where do I belong, and that's going to make you a little more sensitive, in addition to these changes that are happening physically as well. So then think back again to that toddler, right? That 2-year-old, that 3-year-old, that 4-year-old, and you will likely see this overlap. There's again a lot of physical changes happening, and there's that sensitivity, right? People talk about the terrible 2s or the terrible 3s, where children just have these big feelings, these huge emotional responses, just like what happens during the ages of 12 to 18. So you see those similarities taking place. It looks like we have another question or comment. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I am Suleiman from Mali. I have a daughter about 14 years old.
Okay.
And what I have noticed this year, there is no order with her. She throw everything in her house, in her bedroom. It's messy. I have talked about that, give advices, but no solution for that. What's to be done so as to make her neat, something like that?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I appreciate that. So if we're thinking back, I think this is the distinction when we're looking at the third plane being similar to the first. This is something that's different because that need for order, external order that was there in the first plane is not here in the third plane. That's something that carried through from the second plane, where they're really more interested in what's going on internally as they try to figure out who they are, than they are in this need to organize things and figure things out and put things in order externally. So absolutely, a lot of times you're going to see that carryover from 6 to 12 years into the third plane and 12 to 18, where the children, like you're saying, their room is a mess. They throw their shoes in one place, and when they're changing clothes, their clothes are all over the floor. That is definitely something distinctive that continues from the second to the third plane. As far as what you can do to kind of encourage that sense of order is really lean into the child's need for autonomy. So what you want to do is, instead of giving orders, instead of telling them what to do, find ways that you can give them power in this situation, that you can give them the ability to have a choice. So the choice is not that your bedroom needs to be clean, right? You as the adult have set that limit. Dr. Montessori talked about freedom within limits. So I'm giving you freedoms, but they're within this boundary that I've established as the adult. So the limit is your bedroom needs to be clean. So you might say something to your daughter like, I've noticed your bedroom's really messy. Our maybe agreement, right? Maybe you sit down and have a discussion with her and make an agreement that your home needs to stay clean, and maybe even talk about the reasons why. At this age, they're able to rationalize and understand. So talking about the reasons why it's important for your house to stay clean, and her bedroom to stay clean might be helpful. So you say, I've noticed your bedroom's really messy. Remember, we talked about our agreement was we were going to keep the house clean. I really do need you to clean your bedroom. And then you offer a choice. Would you like to clean your bedroom on Saturday, or would you like to clean it on Sunday? Or would you like to clean, maybe there's one thing she cleans first. Would you like to clean your bedroom first or your bathroom? Would you like to make your bed first, or would you like to pick your clothes up off the floor? And you can even offer to help as a choice as well. Would you like to clean your room by yourself, or would you like me to come in and help you? So any way you can give a choice, you've acknowledged what the problem is or what needs to happen. You've set that limit. You've reminded them of the expectation and that agreement that you have, and then you offer them a choice. And in that way, it doesn't feel like you're just telling them, the child, what to do. It's like you're saying, okay, this is what needs to happen, but here's what you can control in this situation. So you're likely not to get that same pushback or resistance because they still feel this sense of autonomy. And again, that really, that strategy works really well in early childhood. It actually will work for all the planes of development. But if you're thinking back to the overlap from the third plane and the first plane, think about a toddler who, it's time to leave the house and it's just taking forever. They don't want to put their shoes on. Now they're, throwing a tantrum on the floor and crying and kicking and screaming. You can do the same thing. You can acknowledge their feelings. I see that you're really upset that we have to leave. It's time to leave the house now. Would you like to put your right shoe on first or your left shoe? Or would you like to put your shoes on by yourself, or would you like my help? So acknowledging and validating how the child feels, what they think, setting the limit of what needs to happen, and then giving them some choice.
Thank you.
Hopefully that was
Thank
helpful.
you a lot. Thank
Absolutely.
you. I'm satisfied.
Great. I'm so glad. I see. Good evening, Oscar. Thank you for joining us. And then Dr. Ripty, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I have one question, please. If the parents are employees and they leave the daughter with the servant, is this correct behavior?
Can you repeat that once again for me? You broke up just a little bit.
Yeah. If the parents are employees and leave the daughter with servant, is it correct behavior?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's still this ability to have autonomy and to assert themselves and to understand what's going on. Absolutely, that would be fine. Yes.
This situation, they leave the daughter in servant. Does this affect capabilities in the future?
So, there's been a lot of research, and not just in the world of Montessori, right, but in human development, about the importance of the relationship with the parent. In fact, I was just reading something the other day that was for Montessori teachers, and it talked about the need. It's a fantastic book. It's called The Tao of Montessori. So it is a book of 81 verses that relate to the verses in the Tao, and it relates them to Montessori and things that happen in a Montessori classroom and Montessori philosophy. And it talked about how as an educator, when you are having conversations with parents, to go into situations and conversations with parents with humility, knowing that regardless of how special the bond is that you might have with the child, and even that you might spend more time, waking hours with the child than the parents do, that the relationship between parent and child is still one of, if not the most important relationships in a human being's life, especially in a child's life, as they're, figuring out the world around them and who they are. So to answer your question, I think that it's important to just consider how profound of an impact the relationship with parents has on a child and on a human being in regards to their development.
Yeah, because we have in the Gulf, this is a big problem to learn or teach the children, because we have housemaid and they leave the daughter in house in the housemaid or servant. That is I see this bad situation to live with children.
Yeah, I was, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, I was a Montessori in-home teacher and caregiver or nanny for about 2 years. I was with she was 1.5 when I started. She was almost 3 when I left. And the older daughter, her older sister, was 9 when I started and almost 11 when I stopped working with the family. And I do think there is a lot of value in what you're saying, because obviously they were very bonded to me. We had a very special relationship. I was there at the house 10 hours a day. So I was with the younger daughter for 10 hours a day. The older daughter I spent every afternoon with. I was taking them to their activities. I was fixing them lunch. I was putting the little one down for naps, sometimes even to bed, bath times, right? And so all of these moments that I was spending with them, we had this very special, very close, meaningful relationship. But I definitely saw that there was still this longing, if you will, this desire to have this bond and this relationship with the parents. And I even spoke to the parents about that and said, I know you are very busy, but they really are seeking this sense, going back to this period and talking about the sense of belonging. This, in the very early childhood, we talked about that need for love and acceptance. These are things the child needs. And so even if the parents are working, they really do need to try, if possible, to make time, one-on-one time, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, right? As you're putting the child to bed or when they wake up in the morning, if possible, if you could just spend 5 to 10 minutes of uninterrupted time, just you and the child really bonding with them, it really is powerful for a child's development, most definitely.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Anthony, go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking me on. I have a question regarding my previous lecture, especially when I was doing first year. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. It had to do with this childhood development when the lecture taught us that there's this period where a child who is growing up with both parents, and then there's a time where the child hates especially the girl child hates the mother, and then loves the father more. I don't know what you have to say about this, whether it's true or not. The reason that we were given during that time, we just laughed because we really didn't know whether it was true or not. And I remember very well that it had to do with the sex of the child, because it's a child, a girl child, and she sees that she has a private part different from that of a male. And then when she sees the mother, she thinks the mother is the one who cut it off. Because of that, the child starts hating the mother and then loves the father more. What do you have to say about that? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question, Anthony. So Dr. Montessori didn't speak about that at all, but there is research to show what you're referring to is called the Oedipus complex. And it's this idea that as the child or the adolescent is kind of going through puberty, that there's almost this competition, if you will, that leads to these feelings of mistrust, disrespect, even hatred, as you're saying, sometimes for the parent who is the same sex. So you were talking about, or the same gender, you were talking about
female, yeah.
Female, but it also is shown to happen with males as well, that boys,
I see.
Right, that boys have this kind of distrust, dislike of their fathers and bond more with their mothers during this time. So there is some research and some studies to show that that does happen. There isn't anything necessarily in the planes of development that back it up. I can remember just from a personal perspective, when I was in this third plane of development, this period of 12 to 18, that I absolutely butted heads with my mother. And really, you know, absolutely would not have said that I hated her. But we definitely butted heads, and I grew closer to my father during that time. So it's interesting, and perhaps there is some validity to that. And maybe that's part of looking at what's happening during this plane of development as the child's trying to figure out their identity and who they are. Maybe that is part of it, that they feel almost, if we take out kind of the biology, right, and the anatomy piece of it that you were thinking about, and we just think about it like spiritually and socially, maybe it's almost like the child, as they're trying to construct their identity, feels some sort of threat from the parent who's the same gender, that they're unable to figure out who they are if there's too much influence from that same gender, same sex parent. That could be a
Thank
possibility.
you so much. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sure.
Jose, and then Patricia, and then we will keep moving through the planes of development so we are able to get through them all. Jose, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I'm from Equatorial Guinea, but presently I'm in Georgia. And my question is related to the previous question that somebody had just asked.
Yeah.
I'm a father of 2 children.
Okay.
One is already 21 years old, and the other one is 6 years old. So the one of 21 years old is a boy, which normally it doesn't approach to me as the girls does, because the girls is different. She always approaches to me, and she, whenever she come back from school, I mean the daughter, whenever she come back from school, I used to be the one to teach her or to let her understand how to solve her own homework. And when the mother tries to do so, she doesn't like. I don't know. What can you say about it?
Yeah, you know, perhaps going back to what I was saying that I experienced personally in this idea, this whole idea of the Oedipus complex, right? Perhaps it's this unconscious, maybe even threat from the same sex or same gender parent. But I would really lean into that strategy that we were talking about earlier, in trying to start off from a place that's non-threatening. So try to empathize with them. So start with acknowledging and validating how they're feeling. So that really kind of lowers that threshold. They're not as defensive then. They're like, oh, okay, so you do see where I'm coming from. You do understand how I'm feeling. Then set the limit, whatever the limit is that or boundary that you're trying to set or talk to them about. And then follow that up by offering them choices so that they really feel empowered. They don't feel like you're just, you know, kind of not always shouting, but just giving them all of these directives, that you really are wanting them to have some sort of autonomy in this situation as well. There's a really great book that strategy actually comes from that I would highly recommend. There's a couple different versions of it. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. And there's different versions. There's one, How to Talk When Kids Won't Listen, How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen, How to Talk So Kids Will Learn. But the very first book that the kind of all of those sprout off from is How to Talk So Kids Will Listen by Joanna Faber. And it is just incredible. That would probably be a really helpful resource for you as well.
Yes, I will try because the boy, which is actually 21 years old, is someone that I give my all support, my own support. Like
Yeah.
my daughter, the two of them, I treat them same way. But unfortunately, I noticed that the boy really want to be all the time with the mother. When I'm at home, he's just scaring to give an approachment to me, or whenever he wants to say anything, he just pass through her mother, and the mother will be the one to tell me. But the daughter, the lady, she always, everything that she want to say, she want to talk to me. She want to, in fact, she lets me understand how she feels, and whatever thing she has, she will tell me. That means both, there is one that is more uh, laying to her mother part, and the other one normally lay to my own part. But I would try to find a way using this book, and might help me more. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. It is something that seems to happen for some reason or another. Like I said, maybe it's this unconscious threat of the same parent of the same gender or caregiver of the same gender. And so really just trying to lean into that strategy and find ways that you can connect and empathize so that threat is minimized for them might be helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jose. All right, Patricia, we'll take one more question and then we're going to finish up the presentation, and then we'll take a few more.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm Patricia from Zambia. And I just wanted to find out the adolescent stage. This is where the adolescents face a lot of pressure. There's increased pressure from the parents, from their peers, and then their internal pressure of a self-stage. But then I wanted to find out, how do you strike a balance as a parent? How do you let go, or how do you know that it's the right time to let go? Because again, the pressures that, the advice that you would be giving your adolescent children might seem as pressure. Meanwhile, you want what is right for them. Then again, from their peers, you also want them to be sociable with other people. But how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I think it really is. Again, it goes back to what I was saying with Jose, right? Like it's about empathizing with them and letting them know that you're there, that you care, that you listen, you're supporting them without judgment. You can still establish those boundaries and set those limits. And I think being really clear about what those limits are, and it might even be, and this is a strategy that's mentioned in that book that I talked about, how to listen, or how to talk so kids will listen. It talks about involving the child, and I think this would be really important, especially in adolescence, involving the child in the conversation and allowing them to be part of a problem-solving process, a part of the process of setting those limits and boundaries, so that they have that sense of ownership, that sense of autonomy. They're part of working with you to figure out where those boundaries lie, so that when something happens, like let's say they cross a boundary, then you can have a conversation and say, but we made this agreement, let's talk about what happened. So I would say really focusing on empathizing with them and developing that close relationship, acknowledging and validating how they feel, even when they cross a boundary and you might be really frustrated. Try to focus first on connecting with them. A really popular phrase is connection before correction. So if you can connect with them, if you can empathize with how they're feeling, acknowledge their feelings and validate them, and then talk about what went wrong, talk about what the boundary is, then it can be really meaningful and powerful, so that they're still learning where those boundaries are amidst all of that peer pressure, but still experiencing that autonomy and that social relationship with their peers that they're looking for. Okay, so for this third plane, quote from Dr. Montessori that really highlights what's happening from her book, From Childhood to Adolescence, says, "The adolescent must never be treated as a child, for that is a stage of life that has surpassed. It is better to treat an adolescent as if he had greater value than he actually shows, than as if he had less, and let him feel that his merits and self-respect are disregarded." So again, try to give them more responsibility, try to give them more respect as if they were already a young adult, and you'll often see them rise to the occasion, where if you treat them as a child and don't give them that autonomy and independence, that might be when you see some of that pushback. So some common characteristics in the third plane are a need for respect and a nurturing environment, great change and relative instability, those big feelings, that sensitivity we talked about, rapid physical and emotional changes, again, just like in that first period of development from 0 to 6, emotional sensitivity, those big feelings, a decrease in intellectual capacity. If you think about how the brain works, if we are in our emotional brain, that's the bottom part of our brain, we're unable to access the thinking rational part of our brain, the top and front part. And so because there's so much emotion going on, there's all these hormones as they're changing physically, it's hard for them to think rationally and really continue developing intellectually, which is where it's interesting then when it comes to decision making and giving them that independence and autonomy, that peer pressure. That's why they still need that nurturing environment. They still need those boundaries. They still need to know that as parents and caregivers and educators, that we're there to help them and support them and give them those limits, that they have the freedom within, because they might not be able to make those decisions, to set those boundaries on their own because they're so flooded with emotion. And there's also this need to discover their intended vocations. They're starting to think about what they want to be when they grow up, right? They're almost there to that fourth plane of development. So what do I want to do when I finish school? There's also a sense of idealism and that continued abstract learning. So they've really moved from the concrete to the abstract. The fourth and final plane of development that Dr. Montessori delved deeply into is called maturity. And this is a developmental period that's characterized by spiritual, emotional, and moral independence. During this time, individuals reflect on the plane that they're in, how they contribute to society, how they contribute to humanity. They begin to express themselves as part of society and figuring out what that looks like, how they can do that. The question that really captures the essence in this period is, what will I do? So again, what do I want to do as a career, but also what do I want to do to make an impact in the world? Some common sensitivities in this period are personal interest, social independence, evaluation of social policy, and personal responsibility. A quote from Dr. Montessori that really highlights what's happening in this fourth plane says, "Culture and education have no bounds or limits. Now man is in a phase in which he must decide for himself how far he can proceed in the culture that belongs to the whole of humanity." So they're really thinking outside of themselves, outside of their neighborhood, outside of the city that they live in. They're really starting to think about the world and humanity as a whole, and what that looks like and how they relate to it and how they fit in and the impact that they want to make. Some common characteristics of this fourth plane are evaluating social policy, developing and really diving deeply into personal interests, spiritual, moral, and emotional independence, and then also establishing what personal responsibility looks like. What is it that I really am in charge of and responsible for as an adult? So I wanted to end here with another quote from Dr. Montessori that really, really emphasizes and urges how important the planes of development are and how they should really guide the establishment of the educational sector, how they should be used to guide what the classroom looks like and what a school policy looks like. In her book entitled The Citizen of the World, she says, with regard to the child, education should correspond to these stages, so that instead of dividing the schools into nursery, primary, secondary, and university, we should divide education in planes, and each of these should correspond to the phase the developing individual is going through. So although we're not going to really get into too much of this, the reason that Montessori classrooms then are multi-aged, and they usually are 3 to 6, 6 to 9 years old, 9 to 12 years old, sometimes 6 to 12, they group all of those elementary years together, then 12 to 15, and finally 15 to 18, is because those children are going through the same plane. So instead of first graders all being in one classroom, second graders all in one classroom, it would be first, second, and third graders all together, fourth, fifth, and sixth graders all together. So it's really interesting that she encourages what this means and how we should restructure the educational sector based on these ideas. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I wanted to say thank you first for having me again today. And I also wanted to share here on this last page, I have some of my contact information if you have any follow-up questions or maybe wanted to schedule a follow-up consultation with me. There's my email address there. Feel free to email me. My LinkedIn is there if you wanted to connect on LinkedIn. My website and my social media pages are also there. These are places that I share Montessori education and parenting related content. I would love if you wanted to take a look at my website or follow me on social media. As you can see in my logo there, my handle is @montessori.matters. So you can look for that and find me and follow along. That would be wonderful. And I will open up the floor to any final questions. I know we had one earlier. So if you still have your question, feel free to raise your hand once again, and then anyone else who might have some closing questions here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Heather White. The conclusion is just everything's been awesome. We had what I would call myself an encyclopedia on the field of child education. We certainly understand the planes of development that you have developed with so much dexterity, precision, and everything else. We are very, very thankful to you, and I particularly love the fact that on our screens right now, we all are looking at the details about you, different ways that we can get in touch with you to follow up on whatever you do and eventually ask questions as well. And this is really very outstanding on your end. And we thank you very, very much, Heather White. And thank you also for opening the floor now for questions. I'm not going to ask one myself, but there is one participant, Judith Oluchiri from Kenya, who's been trying to get to you with an issue she's been trying to bring up. She's telling us that she is a special needs teacher, and despite several years of experience in that field, it's been a hurdle for her to teach children with autism and those who are mentally challenged about identity, and especially on the changes happening body-wise. I kind of read verbatim what she wrote. If you would please address that topic for her, the way to deal effectively and efficiently with children with autism and some other mental challenges, please.
Yeah, so I heard you say kind of thinking about, in specific, maybe part of her question was how to help those children and physical changes. And I think we really have to be mindful of where a child is in their development intellectually. I think sometimes we expect a lot of children based on their physical appearance. And so, you know, I've heard so many people say, he should be able to, or she should be able to, whatever. And when you find out, you know, the reasoning for why they feel that way, I actually had an adult learner I was talking to yesterday mention, well, I have a student who, you know, they're, you know, running through the classroom, they're not listening. And when we got to talking a little bit more, I found out this child was just recently turned 3. They started in the classroom when they a little older than 2. And she's like, you know, I hadn't considered it until we just had this conversation, but maybe my expectations are higher than what would be typically appropriate for his age because of his size. He's a much taller child, a much larger child. And she said, you know, maybe I just need to think about what is the typical development and expectation for a child who just turned 3, where I think what I'm expecting of him is something for a child who is 4 or 4.5. And that looks very different. So when we're thinking about children who are neurodivergent, who have some intellectual challenges, who may have lower IQs and may not really understand what is happening in the world around them, or even what's happening within them, right? Especially when you get to a period in their life where they're having all of these hormonal changes or physical changes in their bodies in adolescence. I think it's really important to try to find a way that you can share that information with them in a way that they might understand. Maybe you need to find, there are a lot of wonderful books now on topics about body autonomy and changes in one's body that are actually written for the early childhood age. So children who are 4 to 5, all the way up to 9 or 10. And maybe something like that, they would be better able to understand than something that's intended for a child of their same chronological age. So thinking about where they are in their development and finding a way to either guide the conversation or to use these resources like books that maybe are for younger children that they would be better able to understand, I think would be a great place to start.
Thank you very much. George Owiti, your question or comment, please. George Owiti.
I wanted to find out, thank you, Ms. White, for your wonderful presentation. I want to find out that we have categorized development into 4 planes. I want to find out, what do we call post 24 years? How do we classify 24 years and above? Thank you.
So George, I just want to make sure that I understood. You're asking what happens after that 4th plane, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So Dr. Montessori did talk a little bit about what she called a 5th and 6th plane. So the 5th was, I'm just gonna kind of go back here for just a second. So when we're looking at this 4th plane, we're looking at 18 to 24 years. And so she was talking about the 5th plane as being 24 to 30 years, and the 6th plane being 30 years and beyond. So in that 5th plane of 24 to 30 years, we're looking at some more intellectual growth. You know, if we're thinking about how the planes overlap, then we would have the 1st and 3rd, the 2nd and 4th. So now that we're in the 5th, it's going to have a lot of similarity again to the 1st and 3rd. So that's when we are developing intellectually. We are really establishing here in the period of maturity, we're trying to figure out how we fit into society and humanity. We're thinking about what our role might be as far as a job. Now we've really settled in that regard. We found our place often. We are growing, continuing to grow intellectually, and we're really making a difference in the world. And then in that period, that 6th plane of development, that 30 and above, I'm just gonna switch back. In that plane of 30 and above, she said it was really more a time of stability, of just really taking advantage of, if you will, or enjoying the fruit of our labor, now that our development has kind of transpired and we're on what's pretty consistent of a path from that period forward, physically and intellectually, it was really just about enjoying relationships with other people, enjoying the vocation that we have dedicated. I'm so sorry. Someone is mowing the grass outside and my dog does not like it. But it's really about just making these meaningful relationships with others and enjoying them.
Thank you very much. We are kind of running out of time, but let's try to see if we can get a question from Dr. Siamak Panahi. Go ahead, Dr. Siamak.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Doctor.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your lecture. I have a question about my teaching. You know, I'm professor of architecture. When I want to teach for kids, architecture for kids, is there any way from Montessori situation or her ideology for teaching architecture to children in any age? I don't know, any sex.
Yeah, so what I would say to start out with is find a way that you can make it hands-on. So in the classroom, when I was with elementary students, so I was with 1st through 6th grade at different points, and we would study architecture when we explore topics like ancient Rome and ancient Greece. We had block sets that the children could make their own Colosseum, where they could build the Roman arch and then look at the way that it was had to be constructed, specifically the size, the dimensions of the different pieces that really allowed it to be exactly the same as the actual Roman arch. So what I would say is start by trying to find ways that you can make it didactic, that you can make it concrete for them, that they can actually build certain structures, and then tease that apart and look at some of those underlying principles in architecture. And the other piece that I would say, again, going back to the question earlier about some of that body autonomy, is finding literature. Anytime that you can find a book that's at a child's level that introduces the concept is a great way to support a child's learning, because it's on their level. And you can then also use that information to introduce different conversations or different lessons that you're leading, but use that child-friendly language, introducing it at a child-friendly level from those children's books as well.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Heather White, once again, I want to acknowledge that your presentation's been quite outstanding from multiple standpoints. We do understand there are so many things that we all would like to hear from you. You are a sure expert, and your class been a definite plus in everything that we do at Atlantic International University. I want to remind every participant as well, those who have raised the issue, but for everybody else, that the entire session has been recorded, and you will soon receive a link to the whole class, which you can reverse, forward, and so forth and so on, and get all the points that you have missed. I do understand there are items that you did not get quite clearly, but you will have that opportunity to go back into every single bit of that presentation, that wonderful presentation from Ms. Heather White. With that note, we are putting an end to this session, unless Ms. White wants to have some concluding words. Go ahead, Ms. White, if you want to wrap up this with a conclusion of your own.
I just want to say thank you again so much to everyone that's here today. I appreciate it. Hopefully this was impactful and meaningful to you. And if possible, I would love it if you all could join us at the next presentation, where we'll take a look at Dr. Maria Montessori's ideas about the human tendencies and what that means for us as parents and educators as well. Thank you again so much. It's been a joy and a pleasure.